So we're going to start with the flower, and we are going to be making our flowers with the Walk in My Garden cartridge, which was one of the first cartridges, but tends to be one of the most popular for us. So I'm going to insert my cartridge. And I'm going to load my mat. I've got the Dewdrops paper. So we're going to be selecting and cutting the daisy. So all you have to do, it's the first button, flower right here, and I just hit daisy. And it's going to come up in my little LCD screen right here. You can see that. The other thing that's great when you're doing this project is it's always handy to have a tiny ruler, and I've got my little Cricut ruler here, because when I start to plan my project, I like to start with the biggest flower in mind, and so I have selected the 4 3/4 daisy. That would be my base, and then from there, when I print out my other flowers, I know that those are going to be smaller sizes. So our speed, we're going to set at medium, and pressure, we're going to set at medium, because it's not specialty paper, it's not extra thick or anything. So I'm just going to select cut. So we're all done with our cut, and we're going to unload our paper. And our daisy is there. We're going to just peel the paper back to reveal our flower. And there it is, nice and neat. And then I'm going to take my Cricut spatula tool and just loosen the edges to make sure that I don't tear my pretty little flower. And there it is. So we've cut out our first shape, which was the daisy in the Walk in My Garden cartridge. And I've cut some other various flower shapes and sizes, depending on layering. Like I said, you want your first flower that you cut, the easiest way to do it, your first flower that you cut should be the biggest, and then you layer on top of that. So as you can see, I have varying colors. This is just a solid green, and then I use some of the other papers. And in order to give it kind of that vintagey feel, distressed looking, I'm going to use some of the Tim Holtz ink that we talked about in the first segment. The darkest colors you want to be more careful with, obviously, because they're going to show up more, and they're a little less forgiving in terms of making a mistake and trying to make it fade. So what you want to do is, I always take the darkest colors and I work them around the edges. So that's the brush corduroy is what I'm using here. And actually the papers that we've chosen to work with today are a little distressed as it is anyway. There's really no right or wrong way to do your projects. They're just really whatever you want them to be. So as you can see, I'm just haphazardly working the ink around, and you don't have to use every ink on every paper. This is the Tattered Rose, and it's kind of a pink. It gives a little bit of a pink feel to the paper, and it coordinates nicely with the other papers that we're going to be using, especially in the butterfly. Now the Worn Lipstick is another vibrant color, so when we do the Worn Lipstick, we want to be a little careful with it, just because it tends to show up more than the others. See, like right there. But you can rub a finger over it, fade it a little bit, get a little messy, but that's kind of the fun of it. The pine needles I picked because the cone paper that we've selected is kind of a dark green. Goes really nicely with this color. And as you find, when you layer your flowers, you're not really going to see any of that inside. So if you make a mistake, not a big deal. So I think I'm well inked up. There were a few pieces, maybe this one on the front here I didn't get, and that's going to be the center. So you are going to see that one. So I'm just going to hit that one. Okay. Now comes the layering of the flower. Biggest one first, which was our daisy that we previously cut. And so you just take and match the centers. And what I try to do is, if you've got a petal here, your next petal lines up in the center. And as you get farther along in your layering, that's a little bit more difficult to do, but just so that you are able to see all the petals. If you put something on and you don't like the way it looks, that's okay, just change it up. Okay, so our layered flower is put together, and I am going to be using one of the Artsilicious brads, which I've got right here, and I picked a cream color, so I'm going to set my flower down for a second. I like this packaging because all the brads stick in this little foam piece. It's kind of a neat idea instead of cardboard that they're all pushed through. Okay, so we are going to select a brad, and I'm going to pick this little pearl one, so we'll pull that one out. And I need a hole, and what's great about the Crocodile Big Bite is that it can punch through many layers, so we're just going to stick that in there. And if you're nervous about where to punch it, you can always mark it before you stick it in there. But I'm just going to fly by the seat of my pants here. And I should also mention that I'm using the smaller hole punch because the brads aren't very big. If you use the bigger hole punch, they might fall through actually. So, okay, I'm going to punch, and then I'm going to make sure I hold it in that position. And then I'm going to take my brad and thread it through the center, turn it over, and press these flat. And we're using a brad for a specific reason. I'll show you why in a little while. But then my flower is here, and I just pick certain flowers and bend up the edges. Gives them a little bit of a 3D look, which is kind of a neat feature of the project. You can bend them and makes them look a little worn and vintage, which is nice. So there is the finished flower and assembly. So we finished the assembly and we put the little brad through the back, and I had said that we use that for a reason. This is our stem. And what's great is that I love to use things that you could find around the house. You don't have to go out and buy everything. So this is just your typical household hanger. You can use white if that's all you have in the house, but typically people have the paper covered ones or sometimes the brass kind. So that's what I have here, and I'm just going to lay that in the center of my brad, and I'm going to take my little brad ends and wrap it around. If that's too difficult for you, sometimes the aid of a needle nose plier will help. So I wrapped my little brad around my hanger. And that would be great. They pretty much stay where you're going to put them, but I like to ensure that they're not going to slide down the hanger. So I'm going to put a little dab of Flour Soft right there to keep it. And if you're under time constraint, obviously you can use hot glue, or I found that if you have a handy heat tool or an embossing tool, you can use that and dry the glue. However, you want to be careful with that because obviously the hanger is metal and it will get very hot and you can burn your hands. So you just want to make sure that if you're running short on time and you do that, you just want to be careful. So we'll set that aside and let that dry, and we'll move on to our next segment, which will be putting together the cone, what the flowers are actually in.